There's a place in the American West where a national park begins at the end of a residential street, 10 minutes from a city of 1 million people, and where the heat kills visitors within sight of their own cars. The distance is 1/4 mile, on flat ground at an unhurried pace. That is a 5-minute walk. It is the length of a shopping center parking lot. It is a distance most people would not bother to drive, would not think to measure, would not describe as a hike at all. Everything in this story happens inside it. The saguaro is the cartoon of the American West. Arms up, 2 of them, one high and one low. It has a shape so instantly readable that it lives on a license plate, on a diner sign, on 1,000 postcards, and inside the keyboard of the phone in your pocket. It belongs with the sunset, the roadrunner, and the margarita. It is the mascot of a vacation. Nobody puts a mountain that has killed people on a souvenir magnet and expects you to smile at it. They do it with this one. It is the only lethal landscape in the country that has been successfully marketed as a cartoon. On Saturday, September 17th, 2016, a 57-year-old man was hiking with a group in the western district of Saguaro National Park, near the Hugh Norris Trailhead, about 10 miles from downtown Tucson. At around 11:45 in the morning, he separated from them. He was not unequipped. He had a water bottle with him. He had a hydration container. Search and rescue teams were called around 5 o'clock that afternoon. A Department of Public Safety helicopter was launched and worked the ridges above him through the rest of the daylight. Searchers found him just after 8 o'clock that night, about 1/4 mile from the trailhead. The bottle was empty. The hydration container was empty. The high in Tucson that day was 95 degrees. Authorities said they believed the death was heat-related. 95 degrees is not a headline. It is a warm day in a hot city, late in a season everyone in Tucson is already tired of. It is a temperature people mow lawns in. From the ground where he was found, you can see the city. 1 million people live down there, with streetlights, traffic, and air conditioning. 10 minutes away in every direction. It did not matter. This is not a story about a remote desert. It is not a story about a wrong turn onto an unmarked road or a broken down vehicle 50 miles from pavement, or days of walking with no water. It is about how a man dies of the heat within sight of 1 million people, a 5-minute walk from his own car, in a park that begins at the end of an ordinary residential street. The cactus has been solving that same problem on that same ground for 100 years, and it barely manages. A saguaro begins as a seed, and almost every one of them dies. The ones that live do not live because they are tough. They live because something else was standing in the right place. Biologists call it a nurse tree, a palo verde, or a mesquite, or an ironwood, and its entire contribution is shade, a few degrees of shelter from the sun. That is the margin between a saguaro forest and bare ground. Then comes the slowest childhood in the American landscape. A saguaro grows an inch or two in its first several years. Not a foot, not a season's worth of visible progress, but an inch or two in total, while the nurse tree keeps the sun off it. It may not sprout a single arm until it is somewhere between 50 and 100 years old, which makes the silhouette on the license plate, the one with the arms up, the one the emoji is drawn from, a century of not dying. It is 100 summers of getting the water arithmetic right, every single year without one bad season that ran long. Get it right for long enough, and this is what you become. The park's 2020 census counted roughly 2 million saguaros. Individuals here reach 40 feet and more. Fully hydrated, they weigh thousands of pounds, a column of stored water standing upright in the sun. Many of them are older than the state of Arizona. Everything here that has survived by managing water with a precision no visitor brings to it. And people have lived here permanently, not visited but lived for a very long time. Long before any of this was a park, it was, and remains, part of the homeland of the Tohono O'odham, for whom the saguaro is not scenery. It is Hay-san. It is kin. Its red summer fruit is harvested with long ribs cut from the skeletons of dead saguaros, and that harvest opens the O'odham year, tied to ceremony that welcomes the monsoon rains. A people who lived here permanently built their calendar around the arrival of water, not around a season, or a solstice, or a harvest of grain, around rain. Saguaro National Park is not one place. It is two districts that flank the city of Tucson. The Tucson Mountain District about 10 miles to the west and the Rincon Mountain District about 10 miles to the east, with the city and its metro area of roughly 1 million people sitting in the gap between them. The park is not out there somewhere. The city is in the middle of it. So the front country trailheads sit at the ends of ordinary Tucson streets, past houses and mailboxes and a speed limit of 25. Then the asphalt ends, and there is a small lot, and a sign, and a path going off into the saguaros. A few minutes of walking among the cactus puts a person inside an environment that regularly kills people. There is no gate, no ranger taking names, no permit, no briefing, no checkpoint. Nothing physical marks the change because there is nothing to mark. The desert simply continues underneath the pavement, and the pavement stops. The Park Service, for its part, does not soften any of this. On hot, dry summer days, it tells hikers to be drinking 1 quart of water per hour of hiking. It tells them to turn back when half their supply is gone. It tells them to avoid the intense heat between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. And it warns visitors, in the park's own words, that the Sonoran desert heat will humble you. That is an agency saying on its own website that this landscape wins. 1 quart per hour. Turn back at half. The liter or two a casual day hiker carries, a gas station bottle, a small bladder, the amount that feels responsible while standing at the car, buys roughly 1 hour of outbound walking before it is already time to turn around. That is 1 hour out, not 1 hour of hiking. Followed honestly, a hot day desert hike is a 2-hour round trip on a single bottle, ending long before the hiker has seen anything he came for. Almost nobody plans that hike, and almost nobody carries the water that would make a longer one survivable. The reason is not ignorance of the rule. The rule feels absurdly conservative right up until the moment it is too late to follow it. The Park Service dates the summer monsoon from July through September, and during it the dry washes and canyons that people casually stroll across can flood. The guidance is to stay out of them whenever thunderstorms are occurring anywhere nearby, especially uphill, and never to drive into a flooded roadway. The same water the O-Odom calendar has always welcomed can arrive as a wall of it, from a storm nobody on the ground can see, over dust that was dry 10 minutes earlier. But neither the flood nor anything with fangs or spines or a stinger kills most of the people who die here. The temperature does, on a day nobody would call extreme, and it works because in this particular desert, on a hike this short, a human being has almost no way of feeling it happen. The hiker is walking and warm and dry. His shirt is not sticking to his back and his face is not wet. There is a breeze coming across the slope, moving through the cholla, and it feels pleasant. Stopped at that moment and asked how things are going, he would not be lying when he said he was fine. He would say he was a little warm and otherwise fine. He is sweating hard. He simply cannot see it because in air this dry, sweat evaporates as fast as it forms. It never gets the chance to bead, to run, to soak into cotton. It leaves the moment it arrives. The Park Service says it plainly on its own safety page. In low humidity, hikers may be dehydrated and not realize it. In ordinary life, wetness is the gauge. A person feels soaked, understands he is losing water, and drinks. It is crude and it works well enough that most people never learn any other method. In this desert, that gauge is not inaccurate but disconnected. It reads dry all afternoon no matter how much is lost, which leaves thirst as the only remaining signal, and thirst arrives after the deficit has opened rather than while it is opening. Worse, it can be satisfied, genuinely and subjectively satisfied, by a few swallows that replace almost nothing. A man who takes 3 pulls from a bottle at a scenic overlook is no longer thirsty, he is still dehydrating. So he walks on, feeling warm, feeling fine, going quietly into deficit. The trail has no canopy. The saguaro, for all its height, casts a shadow like a fence post, a narrow blade of shade that travels as the sun travels and will not cover a seated adult at midday. The palo verde has leaves thin enough to see straight through. The best shade on most of these trails is the boulder, and the boulder has been absorbing sunlight since 7 in the morning. Rock and bare earth take the sun all day and give it back as heat from below. so the hiker is warmed from above by the sun, from below by the ground, and from the sides by rock faces that hold it. The number on the weather report is not the number on the slope. 95 degrees on a screen in an air-conditioned newsroom is not 95 degrees on a south-facing hillside at 1 in the afternoon with no shade in any direction. The outbound leg is the good one. He is fresh, cool from the car, his water full and heavy and reassuring. The morning is still climbing toward its peak, so every stretch he walks is slightly less hot than the stretch he will walk on the way back. And curiosity is pulling him toward one more bend, the ridge just there, the place where the view must open up. The return leg is walked by a different person, one who is tired, hotter, later in the day with less water or none, and very often walking uphill because the pretty part was downhill, and downhill is easy to walk on the way out. Every desert hike is front-loaded with advantages and back-loaded with costs, and human beings estimate the whole trip from the first half. What dehydration does first is completely unremarkable. It begins with a dry mouth, a headache that feels like the one that comes from missing coffee, fatigue that feels like a bad night's sleep, and maybe a slight heaviness in the legs on a climb that should not be hard. Every one of those is something an ordinary adult has felt 100 times in a life that had nothing to do with deserts, and every one arrives with a harmless explanation already attached. So the hiker explains them and keeps walking. That is not stupidity. It is pattern recognition working perfectly on the wrong landscape. All morning the body has been holding its core temperature steady and doing it almost entirely by sweating. That cooling system runs on water and the water is not being replaced. So the body running short does the sensible thing in the short term and the fatal thing in the long term. It reduces its sweat rate to conserve fluid. The cooling throttles down, and core temperature, held level all morning at enormous cost, begins to climb. Nothing about that climb announces itself. There is no alarm, no sharp pain, no obvious moment. The man on the trail experiences it as being hot and tired on a hot day, which is what he expected to be. Once core temperature passes roughly 104 degrees Fahrenheit and the brain begins to fail, with confusion, disorientation, and collapse, the condition is heat stroke rather than heat exhaustion, a rapidly fatal medical emergency. And of every system heat stroke disrupts, it takes the brain first. The organ it disables at the outset is the exact organ needed to get out. Every decision that could still save him at that stage is a clear-headed one. He has to turn around now, sit down in whatever shade exists and stop generating heat, drink the rest of the water instead of saving it, and call someone and say where he is and mean it, not the west side but the trailhead name, the direction, the distance. All of them have to be made before the confusion arrives by a man who does not yet believe he is in trouble. After the confusion arrives, he is no longer capable of making them. He may walk in the wrong direction with complete confidence, or leave the trail entirely, drawn by a shortcut that is not there. He may sit down to rest in a place no searcher will look, behind a boulder, under a palo verde, in a wash below the sight line of the path. Or he may stand up and keep going because going has become the only instruction still running, which is why the empty bottle shows up in so many of these reports. It reads as evidence of carelessness, as though the man rationed badly or brought too little. Usually it is evidence of the opposite. It means he drank all of it, doing the thing everyone believes they would do, and that after the last swallow he was still walking. The bottle is not the mistake. It is the receipt for a mistake made much earlier. The full sequence, from a dry, pleasant, entirely ordinary morning to an unsurvivable medical emergency, can run its course inside a single afternoon. It does not require an extreme temperature. It does not require getting lost. It does not require going far or going alone, or doing anything that would look reckless in a photograph. 95 degrees is enough, and so is a quarter of a mile. It was Saturday, September 17th, 2016. It was late in the season, past the worst of the summer in the stretch of September when Tucson has begun to believe it is over. A 57-year-old man was hiking with a group in the Tucson Mountain District, on the west side of the city near the Hugh Norris Trailhead. Around 11:45 in the morning, he separated from them. The ordinary version of that morning is almost certainly the true one. It was a weekend outing, a group of adults at different paces with different ideas about how far to go. Somebody wanted to push on a little further, or somebody's knee was bothering them, and the rest went ahead. Groups split on trails constantly. That is not a warning sign. It is a Saturday. And 11:45 in the morning sits inside the exact window the Park Service tells people to avoid, which on that particular Saturday would have looked like nothing more than a slightly late start. He had water with him. He was not a man who walked into the Sonoran Desert carrying nothing. He brought a bottle, he brought a hydration container, and he drank them both. Search and rescue teams were called around 5 o'clock that afternoon. A Department of Public Safety helicopter joined the search. For the next 3 hours, that aircraft flew grids over the Tucson mountains, working ridgelines, saddles, and drainages, all the places a hiker goes when a hiker goes too far. Everyone was looking outward into the country because that is where a missing person is supposed to be. Searchers found him just after 8 o'clock that night, about a quarter of a mile from the trailhead. The bottle was empty. The hydration container was empty. The high in Tucson that day was 95 degrees, and authorities said they believed the death was heat-related. He was a quarter of a mile from the parking lot with a helicopter overhead. 8 months later came Saturday, May 27th, 2017. It was Memorial Day weekend. The unofficial first weekend of the American summer, the weekend when the whole country goes outside. Bradley Hughes was 34 years old from Geneva, Illinois. Everything a person learns about heat in the Midwest is true in the Midwest and misleading here. There, heat announces itself through the air, thick and wet and obvious. Sweat runs and shirts stick. Shade is everywhere because there are trees everywhere, and a mile is genuinely nothing. Every one of those instincts is a liability in the Sonoran Desert. The heat that gets people here does not feel like the heat they learned on. He was on the Gould Mine Trail in the Tucson Mountain District, a small trail of roughly 1 mile, sharing a trailhead with the King Canyon Trail near the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. It is not a summit, not a wilderness route, not something requiring a permit. It is the kind of trail a person walks in sneakers after visiting a museum, the kind whose entire promise is that it will not ask much. He was found dead on it that afternoon, with an empty hydration bladder and no other water. The high in Tucson that day was 96 degrees. The two numbers are 95 and 96, 1 degree apart, 8 months apart, on opposite ends of the summer. Neither is a number that would lead a newscast in Arizona. Neither man was deep in a wilderness. Neither was found far from a road. Both brought water, and both were found after it was gone. They were two men who did the normal thing, on the normal kind of day, on the normal kind of trail. Everything in this desert is armed, and that is the part visitors actually notice. The spines, the barbs, the cholla segments that seem to leap onto a boot. It photographs beautifully, and it makes for a good story at dinner, and it is almost never what hurts anyone. Two other things belong in the record. Briefly, park biologists estimate hundreds of wild bee colonies inside Saguaro National Park, and all of them are now considered Africanized. The Park Service warns that an attacking swarm may pursue a person as far as half a mile. On January 8, 2005, a Tucson running group moving off-trail near the southwest end of Tanque Verde Ridge in the Rincon Mountains set off a colony. Two men aged 37 and 46 were severely injured. One was stung roughly 500 times and airlifted to the hospital. That was January in the mountains, in a park most people picture as flat and hot and empty. Because the Eastern District is not only desert. The Rincon Mountains rise to 8,666 feet at Mica Mountain, a sky island carrying oak woodland, ponderosa pine, and mixed conifer thousands of feet above the saguaros. It is cool and green and nothing like the postcard. On September 29, 2021, the remains of a 19-year-old woman from Washington State were recovered near Grass Shack Campground, a wilderness campsite requiring roughly 10 miles of uphill backpacking to reach. The park's chief ranger said the death appeared to be an accident. One death was 10 miles in and one was a quarter of a mile in the same park, on the same map. But it is the quarter of a mile that stays, and the question it raises is not really about the desert at all. Both of those men brought water. Both knew in the ordinary adult way that everyone knows that the desert is hot. Neither was reckless, neither was unequipped, neither did anything a reasonable person would flag as dangerous. So what exactly is the decision that gets made out there? And why does it get made by people who would never make it anywhere else? The most dangerous moment of a desert hike happens in the parking lot, before anyone has taken a step. It is the moment a person looks at a trail sign, does a quick mental estimate, and files the next 2 hours under a category. He files it as an errand, or a stroll, or a quick loop, or a short one because there are dinner reservations. That category, chosen in about 4 seconds, silently determines how much water gets carried, what time the walk starts, whether anybody who is not on the trail knows where they went, and what would count later as a good enough reason to turn around. Nobody ever revisits the category. This park makes that error nearly impossible to avoid because every signal on the approach argues for the harmless version. Nobody flew anywhere, signed anything, briefed a ranger, or filed a plan. There is a visitor center with a gift shop, a museum near one of the trailheads, bars on the phone, and other people out walking in less gear. And the city is right there, the traffic visible on the roads. Human beings calibrate risk to distance from civilization, and that instinct is normally excellent. It is simply not measuring the right variable here. The desert has no idea how far anyone is from a car. The body runs the same at 1/4 of a mile that it runs at 10. The first mechanism is optimism bias, the well-documented tendency to believe that bad outcomes happen to other people. Everyone has it, and it is not a character flaw. A person genuinely without it would find it nearly impossible to get in a car, board a plane, or leave the house at all. Out here, optimism bias is what lets a hiker who has actually read the warning sign walk straight past it. The information registers. The application to oneself does not. The sign is quietly understood to be about the other kind of person, the unprepared one, and not about someone who brought a bottle of water and has done this sort of thing before. The second mechanism is goal-directed behavior, meaning the pull of an objective once it has been set. It is the one that turns a bad estimate into a fatal one. The objective may be to reach the ridge, to finish the loop, or to get to where the view opens up. Once it exists, it begins filtering incoming information. Evidence that supports continuing is weighed fully and accepted. Evidence that argues for stopping gets reinterpreted, discounted, or deferred. The headache becomes dehydration to fix at the car. The fatigue becomes being out of shape. The heat becomes almost there. And in this desert, the signals that ought to trigger a reversal are precisely the ones that filter is best at dismissing, because every one of them is mild, common, and deniable. The sunk cost version is harder still to resist. 20 minutes out on a hot trail, turning around does not feel like safety. It feels like waste, like admitting the morning was for nothing. This is not a failure of intelligence. The reflex when we read these accounts is to hunt for the mistake that separates the victim from ourselves. We want the story to have a fool in it because if they were foolish, then the rules still hold and we are safe. There is no fool in either of these accounts. There was a 57-year-old man on a Saturday hike with his friends, carrying water, 10 miles from downtown Tucson. There was a 34-year-old man from Illinois on a 1-mile trail near a museum on the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, carrying water. Both did the thing that everyone standing in front of a warning sign believes they would do, which is bring water and drink it. That was not enough, and it was never going to be enough because the decision that killed them was made in a parking lot, and it did not feel like a decision at all. Follow the arithmetic honestly, with a typical bottle on a typical hot day, and it means turning around roughly an hour after starting, while the hiker still feels completely fine, often before he has reached the thing he drove out to see, and frequently while other people on the same trail walk outward past him in the other direction. That is the moment the whole thing turns on. It asks a man to abandon his objective on the basis of a number, at the precise moment his body is reporting that everything is fine and his eyes are reporting that the city is right down there. Almost nobody does it. Not out of ignorance of the rule, but out of the ordinary human preference for a vivid feeling over an abstract fact. The moment a hiker finally becomes certain something is wrong, when the headache is undeniable, the legs unreliable, the water gone, is almost always the moment after walking out on his own has become difficult. The distance has not changed, it is still 1/4 of a mile, but the man who has to walk it is not the man who walked it. He is hotter, drier, slower, and thinking less clearly than the one who set off from the lot in good spirits an hour or two before, and the deficit that got him here does not reverse on the walk back. It deepens. That is when he begins to hope someone will come. What would have to happen for someone to come? Somebody has to notice he is missing. Then that person has to decide that missing is serious rather than merely slow, that he is not photographing something or resting in shade or taking the long way around. That is a genuinely hard call to make about an adult on a short trail near a city where the cost of overreacting feels embarrassing, and the cost of underreacting is invisible until it is total. The call goes out, an incident is opened, teams assembled and briefed, ground crews staged, an aircraft requested and launched. Someone has to define a search area, which means guessing where a man went. For a hiker who walked away from a group without stating a destination, that guess has to cover every trail, wash, and drainage within reach on foot. Then comes the searching itself, over ground that hides a human being completely. A man sitting beside a boulder is invisible from 200 feet away on the same trail and effectively invisible from the air. None of that is a failure of effort or competence. It is a sequence, and the sequence takes hours. He separated from his group around 11:45 in the morning. Search and rescue was called around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He was found just after 8 that night. That is roughly 5 hours between the separation and the call, and 3 more between the call and the discovery. And the discovery was a quarter of a mile from the trailhead, which means that for those final 3 hours a Department of Public Safety helicopter and a ground search were working outward, methodically, into the terrain where a missing hiker ought to be, while the answer lay a 5-minute walk from where the vehicles were parked. That is not a search that went wrong. It is a search that started after the only window that mattered had already closed. The body does not wait for the process. The sequence from a dry, pleasant morning to heat stroke can run inside a single afternoon, and the confusion arrives early enough to stop a man from doing the one thing that would collapse every step of a rescue into minutes, which is saying where he is while he still can. A phone is not a rescue in a pocket, and it is not a rescue in the hand of someone who no longer knows which direction the parking lot is. Proximity is worthless if nobody knows it is needed. This is the inversion at the center of Saguaro National Park, and it is why the place does not behave like the deserts people are actually afraid of. Nothing unusual has to go wrong. There is no wrong turn onto an unmarked road, no vehicle breaking down 50 miles from pavement, no navigation error, no storm. The city stays in the frame the entire time, with its roads, its hospitals, its helicopters, and its million people, and none of it can reach a man who did not know until it was too late to say so that he was in trouble. It was Saturday, September 17th, 2016. A 57-year-old man was hiking with a group in the Tucson Mountain District, about 10 miles from downtown Tucson. He left them at 11:45 in the morning. He brought water. He drank all of it. Search and rescue was called around 5. A helicopter searched the ridges until the light went, and just after 8 o'clock that night they found him about a quarter of a mile from the trailhead, with an empty bottle and an empty hydration container on a day when the high in Tucson was 95 degrees. He was not lost in a wilderness, not stranded by a broken down vehicle, not caught out in weather anyone would have called dangerous. He was inside a national park that begins where a residential street ends, in sight of 1 million people on a warm Saturday in September, beneath a cactus shaped like a cartoon. He was a 5-minute walk from the parking lot. The next time you park at the end of some ordinary street, look at a short trail and decide it is only a mile. How much water are you actually carrying? Who knows exactly where you went and at what point? With your legs still fine and the view still ahead of you and the city right there below you, would you have turned around?